Okay, little anecdote before I start. When I tried presenting this to my advisor, Professor Mikolenko, yesterday, this clocked in at 27 minutes, so there's going to be a lot of stuff I'm going to have to cut out of here. And if there's stuff that I skip over that you're interested in and you want me to talk about later, please let me know. But for right now, I'm going to ignore half the stuff on the slides. But anyway, as for me, good afternoon. My name is Kory Kozlowski, and yes, I am presenting on grunge and its significance today. And now I'm going to have to move over here. Many of you have ever owned a pair of ripped jeans or a flannel shirt. There's a good chance that the grunge movement is responsible. Grunge is a musical style that came from the Seattle area that had formed in the late 1980s and became huge in the early 90s as a result of bands such as Nirvana, who I will be focusing on. And the impact of that musical movement is still felt today in a number of ways, such as the clothing that I just mentioned. It's argued that the movement began September 10th, 1991, when Smells Like Teen Spirit was released as a single. It ushered in an era of new popular music and led to grunge bands going from playing in small clubs locally to playing in arenas worldwide and selling out. Not selling out commercially, just selling out. More choice words. Kurt Cobain was seen as the voice of a generation, as he was labeled by many outlets, including Rolling Stone magazine, the local newspapers, MTV, etc., etc. The pressure of being called that and constantly being in the spotlight eventually led to his suicide in 1994. By examining the movement from a bunch of different areas, it's possible to prove that it is very significant and the impact can still be felt today. And right there, here's a picture of Cobain, if you don't know what it looks like. To begin the discussion, it's probably best to start by introducing Nirvana, the band that arguably was the biggest proponent of this movement. Kurt Cobain, as I had already introduced, was born February 20th, 1967 in a suburb of Seattle, Washington. He began to first learn piano at the age of 4. His parents divorced at the age of 8, which later led to a kind of fiercely independent and rebellious attitude that may later be reflected in his music. And he received his first guitar at age 14. He met Chris Novoselic, the future bassist for Nirvana, in 1987 and they began to play shows together. In 1989, they met Chad Channing, and they became known as Nirvana. They recorded their first album together later that year for $606.17. Shortly after the album was released, he was replaced by the well-known Dave Grohl, Channing was. And at that point, the group wanted out of their contract with their indie label, Sub Pop Records. In order to do that, they decided to seek out a major label that would be able to buy them out of it. They ended up signing with Geffen as a result of talking with Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth, a band that had previously signed with Geffen. Nevermind, the album that featured Smells Like Teen Spirit, was then released September 24th, 1991 as a result of that relationship, and it was optimistically predicted by the execs at the record company to sell 250,000 copies based on the sales of Goo, the record that they made with Sonic Youth. From there, obviously, any discussion concerning the musical genre, we need to talk about the music itself. Grunge genre, as I mentioned earlier, was formed over a number of years, mainly in the Seattle area. It had a very unique sound that hadn't been heard before, and lyrically and sonically, it reflected pain and misunderstanding. Arguably, the style first had its roots in the UK punk scene in the 1970s, featuring bands such as the Sex Pistols and Clash. Those bands featured aggressive guitar playing and lyrics that generally related to what they felt ailed contemporary English society. On the other side of the pond, the underground scene in the 1980s, featuring most prominently Sonic Youth, who I've discussed, and the Pixies, also influenced the sound of grunge. The Pixies in particular were a huge influence on Kurt Cobain. They used what was later known as the quiet loud guitar dynamics, where throughout the song they would change between melodic guitar playing and aggressive, loud, crunchy playing. And that had a very prominent influence on Cobain, and a lot of that style was incorporated into his music. Also, Black Sabbath, awesome. Right here on the left there is an image of the Sex Pistols playing in the 1970s, Johnny Rotten with Sid Vicious. Right is Sonic Youth, and the bottom is the Pixies. When you think of the term grunge, you think unclean, dirty, unkempt. way, that's how the music got its name. It takes what we normally apply to visuals, it takes it and applies it to audio. The term was first used by a man named Mark Arm, who was in a number of bands during the 80s and 90s, including Mudhoney, one of the first grunge bands. He used it in a letter he sent to a rock magazine in the 1980s in order to describe the music he was playing. Curiously, a lot of the bands that were labeled as such didn't care for the label. The sound, again, distinguishes it very much from other rock and pop genres at the time in terms of tone and lyrics. In that discussion, there's no better way to do it than to look at Smells Like Teen Spirit, the song that started the whole thing. It had the dynamics, as I've indicated, they indicate very stark difference between the choruses and the verse. It's very quiet during the verses. You can focus in on the words, the bass playing, etc. During the chorus, the drums get very loud, the guitar playing gets aggressive, Kurt Cobain starts to scream. So it creates a very distinct contrast between the two sounds, and it creates a build-up when going into those choruses. The lyrics, again, feature more prominently during the verses, and those also help set the tone. They're very dark, foreboding, and they show carefree attitude and a lack of motivation. Lyrics such as, oh well, I guess it makes me smile. It's fun to lose and pretend. Those sound nonchalant and uncaring. Show apathy, a lack of motivation, which is something that started to kind of be associated with Generation X, which I will get to in a little bit. And it was also additionally inferred to be an anthem for teenage revolution with lines such as "Load up on guns, bring your friends." Both of those were attributed to its massive success. Without getting into a ton of details, since I'm short on time, you can examine a ton of other songs and kind of feel the same thing. Heart-Shaped Box, also by Nirvana, features a lot of the same ideas. Very dreary lyrics, Alive by Pearl Jam, semi-autobiographical lyrics. Great story behind that song. Angry Chair, Alice in Chains, one of my personal favorite grunge songs, not one of the more well-known ones. Lane Staley, the vocalist, suffering from a heroin addiction. He kind of let that seep into the music. Very dark, very depressing, and this is the kind of music that at the time was popular. It wasn't what you see today or before, which I'll get to now in media. Back then, obviously, there was no internet. In order to connect with an audience, it was either through the radio or starting in the 1980s, MTV became a quick proponent of the introduction of music. MTV, as a result, helped expose grunge and was considered a creator of new culture at the time. During the 1980s, introduced youth to Duran Duran, Madonna, Michael Jackson, Rat, and Van Halen. They prominently played a genre that became known as glam metal. Glam metal basically takes the sound of heavy metal, crunchy guitars, etc., and amps up the visuals more so than the music. Bands would wear, if you think of Poison, Motley Crue, they would wear big hairdos, makeup, etc., etc. It was focused, like I said, focused on the visuals. The executives loved it because they thought that for a television network, that's what would sell. The visuals were more important than the audio. The lyrics weren't very descriptive. They were just about partying, about women, about drugs, about alcohol, all that fun stuff. So when it came to the time of the early 1990s, studies showed that that generation, it didn't really connect with them. They felt, due to just extraneous circumstances, which I will get to, that music just didn't connect to them and it wasn't meant for them. So they wanted something that was more thought-provoking. Eventually, that led to Smells Like Teen Spirit hitting the airwaves, college radio, and eventually getting into the MTV rotation. And the singles, the sales of the single and the album skyrocketed. Cobain, Nirvana, and also Grunge. Another area that helped bring about the whole grunge idea is Sub Pop, the label that originally signed Nirvana. They signed a bunch of similar sounding bands. They kind of had the idea of Motown where everyone had the same image. They signed the bands with the flannel, with the ripped jeans, with the hair. That's where that kind of comes from. So that's where that came from. Microsoft and Starbucks at the time, Pacific Northwest, were very big. They were seen as hip and trendsetting in the 1990s, so all eyes were on them. They came to TV movies, Twin Peaks. Premiered then, it was around the same time. Had the whole flannel thing going on. SNL showed bands like Nirvana, Soundgarden. They had people like Wayne and Garth from Wayne's World that kind of fit that image as well. And obviously, for any of that to make an impact, it had to have an audience, which is Gen X. That title was borrowed from a 1991 Douglas Copeland novel. They were the target of the movement. There There was a Time magazine article at the time that called them lazy, indecisive, careless, disloyal, etc. They were seen by the baby boomers as just not, they couldn't connect with them, and that kind of created a disconcert between the two generations, and that's how grunge was able to resonate with this generation. They felt isolated from those who came before, and this music connected with them. It articulated the fears that they felt, and so on and so forth. I'm out of time, so I'm just going to blow through this real quick. Lasting impact. Well, like I said, any questions, ask me. So why did this matter? Okay, Cobain's death signaled the end. Grunge allowed for other genres to kind of pave the way. It allowed for pop punk, post-grunge, Britpop to kind of have an impact. Cobain became revered alongside Morrison and Hendrix in 27 Club. Tons of different artists before, during, and after Cobain and Nirvana cited them as an influence. As you can see, tons of different genres, tons of different people, all attribute Cobain and Nirvana as part of their sound. Dave Grohl went on to form the Foo Fighters, and the Billion members performed alongside Paul McCartney for a benefit show on 12-12-12, which goes to show everybody kind of went full circle, that they were able to perform with someone of that stature. In conclusion, even though I kind of had to skim through most of it, grunge was a revolution. It had very proven significance in terms of identity, culture, fashion, and music. And news is still coming out about this today to further prove that it's significant. Frances Bean, Cobain's daughter, recently did an interview with Rolling Stone in which she said she didn't even like his music, which was pretty good. There's a new documentary on Cobain coming out, and I read an article on Rolling Stone's website earlier this week that said that they're still discovering new material from the band, even though they haven't been around for so long. So next time you pull that flannel shirt out of your closet, remember why it's there.